Happy Tuesday.
Happy Tuesday.
It's Halloween week. We should have dressed up. I just thought of that.
I mean, we could run and go get our no, okay. We could have dressed up. Hard pass on that.
Fair.
A lot of preparation. We'll do pictures of our team building on the 31st.
All right, we'll see.
Sounds good. Today we're talking about culture and change, and now change has been on the tip of our tongue like constantly for the past 6 months. It's been really interesting in how much change is coming through technology, through generational change. There's so much change happening to companies, and the impact on the culture can be good if you strategically plan it to be good, and it can be really hard. And so I think that's what we really want to unpack today.
Yeah, I think what has come up in the last few months is when you're really talking about an ROI on culture, which is that, that magic trick of higher productivity, lower turnover, and all that kind of stuff. What you're actually talking about is improving your company culture's ability to change in good ways, right? We're talking about creativity or innovation or right? How do you find that 1%? And that's ultimately where you're going to see return. Am I wrong?
Yeah. And I think so. Some stats for people out there, because we love our little numbers here, is that what I don't think a lot of leaders have really looked at, or maybe they have, maybe they're feeling it, is that 50% of their employees in 2025 are going to be millennials and Gen Zs. And that's a huge amount of people. So there's a lot of social change that's also happening. Okay. Then we have AI technology. There's a lot of tech change that's happening. And then we have just the speed of which business is running. Like, you could become obsolete tomorrow by a competitor. So there's a lot of competitive change that's happening. And so how do companies get that ROI through culture while managing all these changes? What should they watch out for?
Well, I think, change, there's a reason why people cringe when you say the word change, right? Like people want change, but they don't want too much change, and they want it for a little while, but not for a long time, right? So I think, and we see it with a lot of the leaders we talk to, is there's oh, this is really cool, I'd love to do this, but we just implemented this. My people, they need a moment. Right? Give them a moment. I don't want to exhaust them, right? I don't want to make them crazy, right? We just did this, now we're doing this. So I think understanding where your people are at, and it will be different for every individual, is really important, right? And then how does that trend across your whole team? At some point, your whole team might be ready to rock. Maybe there's one person that's still struggling, but you don't exhaust them, right? That'll kill culture faster than anything.
And I think so. Let's unpack change exhaustion. What creates change exhaustion? Because if change, I think it's the frustration of poorly rolled out changes that increase the change exhaustion. So everybody has a certain amount of capacity in their bucket, right, to handle uncertainty or to handle frustration. And I think that what ends up happening is if you've just rolled out a change and you haven't really put much thought into it, and there's a whole bunch of issues or poor communication or, fixes that need to happen, what you've done is you've eliminated a significant portion of their capacity in their bucket to be able to handle change, right? But so investing in better change implementation, I think, is huge. And where people fail in change implementation in their company, that really grates on the culture. What do we say is the number one failure in change implementation?
I don't know.
It's not logistics. It's not the logistics stuff.
Oh, yeah. I think people are really good at coming up with usually it's like a PowerPoint presentation, although Canva is kind of taken over by now, right?
Should be.
Really good at like scheduling the training meetings, and maybe even create like a little reference guide or something. Like you do a certain amount of logistical things to help people along. But then that's it. And what you forget is the emotional part of people. Like, do they have the desire to engage? And that is really interesting, because even a lot of the change training, they skip over that. That's like the first 5 minutes, and the next 2 days are on logistics, right?
Right.
And what I think we're saying is like, actually, it should be reversed. If you pay attention to the emotional piece, your people will deal with the logistics. It will be less energy for them, because they'll be open to it, right?
Absolutely. And I think like, so you've got people and like the emotional desire, and I think we don't spend enough time on this. So like, I know in a lot of change, like they're like, oh, awareness and desire, and people are like, hey, here's what's happening. But it's got to start before that, and not like, here's what's happening is an awareness. Awareness is what is the hell that we're suffering? Because so many people, and I mean, you could talk about the physical body, you could talk about workplace. So many people will tolerate pain because it's what they've known. They don't even know that they're living in pain. Right. And so there's a lot of that is essentially like accepted pain in our lives and in our workplace. And so they don't know that they're living in hell. And maybe they do, right? Maybe the frustration's getting there, so this could be easier, right? This is the hell. This is the frustration. Here's what we're living in. What is the heaven? What is it that we want to get to, and how does that personally impact me? Because if you're like, oh, and we're going to have like better profit margins to report to our stakeholders, like me over here, I'm like, okay, what's good for you? What's in it for me? Right? So like tying it to the individual level.
Well, and that's the really interesting thing about that is you take any sales training and they're going to talk about stuff like that, right? Like you are essentially trying to sell the idea, especially if it's a bigger change, to your people and get them on board with it, right? And I think where you see a lot of the change resistance come out, whether it's people feeling overworked or they're skeptical because this is like the fifth time in as many years that somebody's tried something, and you're like, yeah, whatever, whatever your reason that you're not really on board. If you pay attention to that awareness piece and explain that, hey, like we're all feeling this, you're like, yeah, that frustrates me too. Now all of a sudden there's common ground, right? And it can be as simple as that. We're like, all right, what are we going to do about it? And even the skeptics will be like, well, I did have this idea. Do you know what I mean? Like you said, it starts before.
It totally does. And I think that, the desire from the individuals, like speaking to what matters to them, and every person, every individual is going to have a different what's in it for me. Every different level has a different what's in it for me. So you can't just give a blanket statement to that. Like you've got to talk to the people on the individual level. The other thing we know is like the rate of adoption, right? And you've got people like they do this on like for implementing technology, but it's the same. It's the same against change. And I love that you, first of all, time it, park that. Okay, shoot, squirrel. Here we go. You said you're selling your people, and you're absolutely right. You're selling, and what they're paying with is their capacity to tolerate your change rollout. Right? That's their currency. Their loyalty, they're like, that's a currency, right? So I think that that's a really interesting thing. Now, back to my like change adoption thing. For those of you who can't follow me, just, cut and reorder this video because I am a squirrel. So with the rate of adoption, you've got early adopters, right? Like they're the ones who are like, woo, we're on it. Something new, shiny. That's me. Then you've got the people who are like, okay, I'm willing to give that a try. Those are the early ones. And then you've got like the mass group, and then you've got the like huge resistors, right? And it's kind of like a bell curve. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Where should people focus their energy though?
Well, and I think this is where people would get it wrong, right? And if you watch Simon Sinek, he talks about this, or like what we try and do is broadcast to everybody with one-way communication. This is what we're doing. This is why you need to get on board, blah, 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 blah. And we try and sell to the masses right off the bat. And I think this is where we see software implementations fall down, right? ERP stuff, like it's what you better off doing is finding your early adopters or your champions or whatever and focusing on them and really empowering them with why we're doing it. In our case, we really focus on the emotional piece of like, if you're a change champion, what does that mean? What are you signing up for, right? What does that mean in terms of how you take it to everyone else? And now you've got these champions that, when you're standing in the lunchroom and someone's like, oh my God, did you hear that new software? Like, it's the worst. And someone's like, I know, I spent 40 minutes. I wasted a whole hour yesterday trying to click the button and it didn't even work. And then when I called IT, they didn't even know, no, right? Like this happens. And like the island of misery grows, but now you have your early adopter that's like, oh, hey, like, tell me about that. Like, I totally can help you out because I figured out, or I'll go tell someone and right? You have these like good apples all over the place, disrupting the negative energy, so to speak. And those are the people that are going to sell it to everybody else, not you, the leader or the executive that made the decision or whatever, right? Sorry, it's not you, right?
And okay, so for people who are tuning in, I don't know if they know the Good Apple story, so let's maybe expand that. It was from the Culture Code, I believe. They were showcasing research done down in Australia about this study that they did, where they tried to prove the one bad apple theory, that one bad apple will spoil a whole bunch. And so they paid a guy to sit into these like 5 test groups that their goal was to create like a marketing plan or whatever. And they put the bad apple in there, and his job was to like be a downer, like be abrasive, like just try to bring the whole team down through like being an argumentative, like hard to get along with person, right? Essentially being a bad apple. And, I think the surprise is like how many of the teams accomplished their task. Well, at the end of the day, all 5 of them got done. One of them blew everybody else's out of the water. And they really like reviewed what that team was. And so on that team, there was a person who created like really intense psychological safety. He would like, anytime this person would try to shut down in that day, he'd be like, no, let's hear them out. And like, and then he would also include that person. Okay, now what is your thinking? But so he like kind of that, what we call the golden apple or the good apple, really helped create that team. And it was really funny because the guy who was supposed to be, he was in on it. The bad apple was like, I would find myself helping. And I would be like, oh yeah, wait a second, I'm not supposed to be doing this. And so like, it's amazing that, yeah, one bad apple, might spoil the bunch, but one golden apple can like totally change the game. And so I think it's a lot more powerful than we think. So when Adam says one good apple, those good apples, those change champions who are like, hey, I totally understand you're frustrated. I have heard that too. This is how we get it fixed right away. I'll let you know when it's fixed. Oh, okay. But like stopping, like you said, that island of misery from growing, because it's so easy to jump on the bandwagon, right? It's so easy to start, sorry guys, not safe for work word, a bitch fest on the latest rollout, right? And to start that whole, and then you can feel it. And you feel you walk away and go back to your desk and you still feel that frustration in your body. You hold it inside. And so then somebody calls you or you answer an email and you don't think it comes through. And so like that toxicity from that negative energy flows through your whole day. And it's transferred to your whole company. So like, it's so key to stop it.
Well, and I think generally, with change, people are thinking about this and they do pick, they're like, all right, if you have any questions, go see Steve and Sally, right? They'll answer your questions. But Steve and Sally have a job. And yeah, they were a part of it. They whatever aware that they're the ones to answer questions or whatever, but like they haven't been empowered to even consider the emotional part we just talked about, and they're not actively soliciting feedback. So what you have is like two passive kind of robots that are like, yeah, if someone comes and asks them a question, they'll answer it or they'll find out the answer. But other than that, they're going to go about their day. So what we really try and do is like take those early adopters, teach them about the emotional journey of change and the different roadblocks and personalities and things to watch out for, and then empower them to go actively push, essentially, right? Help us push this thing up the hill. Don't just sit on the top, like looking around. Do you know what I mean? So like, listen to feedback. Go around and ask people, hey, have you tried it? What'd you think? Like, you know, and be these like active role models in the process. And I think when we do that, the difference in the speed of adoption is insane. Like all of a sudden, like you know, it takes a little bit of training, a little bit more energy up front, but you're essentially supercharging your secret agents, right?
Well, and I think too is like being humble in a rollout. Like for people who have done the change up front, right? Whether it's a new process, a new software, whatever, they've been in the trenches to develop it, and it's now getting rolled out or implemented. If you don't like the word rollout, it's now getting implemented into the day-to-day operations. I think it, you know, we can't get emotionally attached to all that creation time that we put in. We should come to our implementation being like, it could fail, right? We got to be permission to fail. And then also be that humble to say, hey, we're rolling this out. We know there might be kinks. So we want to know about it. And we're going to fix the ones that are critical. And then we're going to run another, like an improvement round for all the little ones that we can, you know, implement later. But like being able to communicate that, right? And just permission to say, we know it's not going to be perfect. Please be patient with us, versus like trying to sell it as like, oh, you're going to love it. It's going to be perfect. It's all this, it's everything we wanted. Like we have to be realistic in how we roll it out and just be like, hey, we tried really hard. We did a lot of work, but we know it's still going to have some issues and it's not everybody's going to love it at first. So please give us that feedback. And I think then people are like, hey man, I know they put a lot of work in. This really irritates me, but they're like, there's a little more permission there. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think so, right? Like, I think there's a lot of very talented people that puts a lot of thought into these rollouts, right? And at some point, you know, you can't pursue 100%. You'll never get it right. There's too many unknowns. There's too much uncertainty with how your people are going to react and different points of views and all that kind of stuff. And you can send surveys and you can interview people and you can take feedback and you can tell everyone that you took everyone's feedback and took it into account and whatever. But like, it's still, you're going to get questions and you're going to get pushback and you're going to spend all your time answering the same 5 questions and you're right. Like it's a lot. And I think communicating how that's going is also important. Once you start it, you're like, hey, look, we heard back. We got 367 suggestions and feedback. We reviewed all of them. We implemented 42 of them, an additional 70 where we decided to, group until a later date and and we're like so excited because it's getting better all the time. And here we are on the journey. And, right at the beginning, we told you it would be a 2-year journey. Then we're 6 months in and we're actually doing way better than we thought. And like,
yeah,
right. That seems like the kind of thing I'd be like on board with. And it's excited because I have an idea and I'm contributing. Right. That's it. That's all. People just want to be heard. That's all.
Well, and I think that's like one of the things with the change resistance. We do this awesome like workshop from one of our clients inspired this workshop. And it's called Jorge's Bridge. And that workshop is so powerful in understanding different change resistors and understanding what they need, right? Because if I'm resisting change because what I hold dear is my competency and you're bringing into my life a whole new skill set that I have not been trained on and I'm not aware of, and I feel like I'm like going to not be perfect and that's my personality, my resistance is totally different than the person who is a 30-year veteran. They've done it, they know this job inside and out. And so what they want is like to be heard. What the other person wants is to know that they're going to succeed. So they're going to want more training, more support, make sure that they've got it exactly right. Totally different from the other person who's overloaded and just has no change capacity, right? They're all different conversations. So understanding why somebody's resisting change. But like you said, the change champions are usually trained on the change logistics. Where I think is really powerful is when you take those change champions and you train them on the emotional, right? So they start recognizing the types of change resistors and asking those questions like, hey, how are you feeling about the change? Has it impacted your job? Like, do you, getting into that emotional side of things, because that's where people flip, right? Sure, you could push through and like be like, if you don't use the new tool, you're gonna get brought into the principal's office, essentially. But like, this is not how we want to run our companies. So like, getting them to talk about that emotional side of things, I think, is super powerful.
Well, and I think when you're looking at problems to solve, you tend to look at, there's like quick wins, bigger projects, things of that nature. Like the biggest blaring problem that has the biggest impact tends to be the one that you want to solve first. Like, what's the best bang for your buck, right? How much energy can I put here to get how much impact? And I think we're looking at all these things and we're totally ignoring this big, giant emotional problem. And it actually doesn't even take that much energy, and the impact is way higher than any other little logistical glitch that you're going to address, right? And the people that are good at this job, they kind of do it naturally, right? They're good listeners. They're probably, a little bit charismatic, or they'll talk through it or whatever. But if you as an organization put some real energy into it, you're going to see some crazy results, right? And I think I saw a stat on this that I thought was really interesting. Put it in perspective. Is said, so take a 100-person company, like round numbers. And let's say that the founder, the CEO, is the biggest change champion. They're the ones that are like kind of crazy, kind of entrepreneurial. They're always wanting to adopt a new software or go to a new market or partner with this person or do all this crazy stuff, right? They are the change champion. So you got 1%. Okay. So now let's grow it to like a 10,000 person company. 1% of that. Do you have that many change champions in your company? Could you point to them and be like, yeah, those guys are like constantly working and constantly pushing and addressing like, no, you end up with like maybe 0.01%. So it's like, no wonder those organizations, when you get to that size, can't turn quickly. They don't, right? It doesn't equate. I just thought that was a fascinating way to look at it.
Well, and I think that a lot of times companies are hesitant to hire entrepreneurial types because they're like, well, you're going to up and leave because you want to start your own company. But the term intrapreneur really resonates with me. And that's I heard it from JT Fox on one of his social media posts, but it was an intrapreneur, somebody who, they don't want to go start their own business, but they are like, they're drinking the Kool-Aid. They are like your biggest fan and they are your change champion. And they're like, yeah, I'm on board and I'm what's next. Like, I know what's next and I can't wait to jump on. And they're so passionate to give their all because they believe in the bigger vision and the purpose of the company. And those intrapreneurs, I think, strategically trying to build those is kind of like your change champions as well. And so that they're like helping to drive.
I view those people, they're the like hold my beer type person, right? Like,
yes.
You know what I mean? Like, oh, this sounds fun, right? Like, oh, this will be so hard. There's so many people involved and there's so much information, but we can get AI and like, oh, that'll be so cool. Like, let's do it, right?
Yeah.
All right, cool. But you're right. You're like, oh man, like they could leave and they could start their own company or they could go to someone else. But then you ask them and they're like, oh my God, not in a million years.
Right.
Right. So
hard pass. That sounds like a you thing.
Yeah. Find those unicorns, right? And then just keep them happy with sexy problems. That's it. Right.
Well, I think too, and this is something like we've seen too. And like the reason why change is such a thing for us is because it's constant in a company, but it's it hits on all 4 pillars of our engaged culture. You need psychological safety, clear accountabilities, effective communication, and strategic improvement in every change that you do. Like it hits on all 4 pillars. But one of the things that I think is a really cool idea is making sure you protect people from change until they're ready for it. And so like you and I, we're the visionaries. We're like, oh, and then this is coming and this is coming, but we have to be careful not to disrupt our whole team until it's time. Right. And so that's something as we grew that we learned the hard way. Right. It's like, oh, well, don't worry about that. Like, it's still in beta test. Right. Versus like, what are we doing now? Oh my gosh, these guys are like all over the place. So this concept of innovation from the outside, where you literally have this like protected pocket of change, and they're going through these ideas and they're running these new sort of tests. So like, what if we did this? And what if we did this? Or here's all this change happening here. Okay, now let's see. There's this test where does it run with our operations? How does it integrate? Okay, are we ready to integrate? And then go through, and now everybody come on board through that awareness, desire, and like paint that picture out. But a lot of times, like, you create something, you just throw it at them. Right? And it's where they're like in the ideation process, and it's for some people that's stressful.
Yeah, and I think your biggest resistors will rear their heads here, where they're just like, whoa, easy, I don't know if this is for me, right? But if you know that, especially if these people are in influential positions, and you take the time to maybe give them like a preview or walk them through it or answer their questions, you could take a big, like, major resistor and turn them into your biggest champion very quickly, just by taking a little bit of time to, like, walk them along the journey. So I think, if someone's project, we look at change as a project. So who's project managing this change? One of the key things is identifying your influencers and like how you're going to, it's stakeholder analysis, really, right? And how are you going to handle them and get them on board and all this kind of stuff, right? And you might have this list of people that you think would be great, and then you've got two that are going to be a little more tricky. But if you navigate them properly, like they'll show from the rooftops how great this is, right? So I think with a little bit of thought as to who your people are, how they tend to react, this type of stuff, and then focus on that. And yeah, like the logistics, as trained as we are, like we're engineers, we're trained to build spreadsheets for everything. We're right, and I love a good spreadsheet, but as trained as we are to address the logistics and build these like plans and all this kind of stuff, like that's, of course, don't not do that, but take a moment and consider your people and how they're feeling. And if you do that, they'll figure the rest out. I really believe that.
Right? I'd rather have the right people on the ship than all the process and tools in the world, because the right people will build it.
Yeah, totally. So,
and they'll probably build it better than the original. And that's the cool part.
Right? How many times have we had a great idea and then we, put it to the team and it comes back like, evolved into something that is totally different, totally better. We're like, okay, cool. That's amazing. Right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you like hit it on, like, it's such an individualistic approach as well. And I know we're at the top of the hour here, but it's like knowing your people to say, okay, this person needs to process. So like, I'm not going to tell them in the like meeting that we're having on Tuesday, but I'm going to tell them Friday before. And so that they can process it a little bit more and be like, hey, on Tuesday, this is what we're talking about. I know you like to process stuff. So I'm going to give you a heads up on kind of what it is. And then that way, when you come to on Tuesday, you can be prepared. Right. And so, and then letting people know, like, anybody who wants to process a little bit more, like get them to like understand how they process. Because I think what ends up happening is if you brought that person and you presented in the whole team, their immediate reaction is like, no, like fists up, fight, no. And they can inspire a lot of people in that team to then do the same, versus they just needed time. And I think the individualistic approach seems exhausting to leaders, because you're like, I have so many people. But the amount of time it saves is huge, right? The amount that so you're really, you're putting in the effort up front. So change is happening, Adam. We know it. And in fact, I think in the next decade, we're going to see more change in business than we've ever seen in the history. Is that a fair statement?
I think so. I think it's accelerating all the time, right?
Huge. So what 3 things should leaders do with change?
Well, I think the first one is identify your early adopters or your champions. That's number 1 for sure. Number 2,
teach them the emotional side of change.
Yep. Teach the emotional side of things, empower them, kind of supercharge them, so to speak. And number 3, I would say, is be humble. Communicate that you know it's going to be a bit rough. You're here to listen and, understand that you're going to go through this kind of improvement phase for a period of time, and communicate that and be okay with it.
Yeah. And then, celebrate the little wins, because that helps fill the capacity bucket up, right? And I think you and I are bad for this, and I know we're over time, but you and I are bad for this. We go a million miles a minute, and then we look back, we're like, holy, look how far we went. But it's not very often we look back and celebrate it. And so I think being able to say, this is how far we've come, and celebrate those small wins help fill everybody's bucket. So they don't feel like it's just, they're constantly battling this uphill thing, right? But they're celebrating the little mountain climbs at every ridge.
All right.
Awesome. Okay, this is awesome. We're going to do it again next week. Looking forward to it. Maybe one of these days we'll actually get in person and do it, because every time we go to do that, we get distracted. I don't know why. But glad to be back live with you, Adam, and we'll see you next week.